Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This series of talks on the meanings of our dua has been inspired by a particular farman of Maulana Hazrat Imam Nur Maulana Shah Karim al-Hussaini Salawatullahi alayhi, which he made at Pune, India on 22nd February 1969. My beloved spiritual children, I came in and I heard several surahs of the Quran being recited, and I remind you of the farman which I made to you in the past. I would like each and every spiritual child not only to know the dua by heart, but to understand the meaning of the dua. It is fundamental for you and for your children and for the future of our Jamaat that each and every one of you, particularly the younger members of the Jamaat, should understand the meaning of the dua. Inspired by this particular farman, this series of talks will explore the deeper, the esoteric, the batini meanings of our dua. Our dua, as we all know, is a compulsory or an obligatory aspect of our tariqah rites and practices. All of us Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims are required to offer the prayer of dua 3 times a day, once in the morning and twice in the evening, preferably in congregation. Maulana Hazrat Imam has made many farmans where he has told us that his nur is present in the Jamaat Khanas everywhere all the time. And therefore, for us to go to Jamaat Khana and to offer our 3 daily compulsory duas is extremely important for us. I would like to give an example from nature. For instance, if we had a dry single stick and we set a match to it or light it, certainly the stick will give some light and some heat, but if you have a large bundle or a bonfire of dry sticks and you set a light to that, there will be far more light and far more heat. In the same way, although we do benefit spiritually when we offer prayers individually, but the spiritual energy which is generated by congregational prayer is something much greater and of greater benefit to us. And this is why in the faith of Islam, congregation prayer is extremely important. The second point which I want to touch on is that there is a famous prophetic tradition or a hadith of Nabi Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, in which he said that dua is the essence of Ibadat. What this means is that dua is the foundation of all the other rites and practices of our tariqah. And when the foundation is strong, then all the other practices of the tariqah can build a strong edifice or a strong building on that foundation. So this is a foundational and a compulsory practice for us, and therefore it is important for us to know the meanings of the words which we recite in our daily dua. Another important point is that we do not only recite the 3 daily duas, which preferably should be a congregational prayer. In our tariqah, which is on the level of haqiqat, we are encouraged by the Imam of the time to remember God at all times or constantly. On the level of Shariat, this is not the same case. On the level of Shariat, Ibadat or prayer is immersed in time. In other words, time is divided into several sections, and then prayer is offered at the set intervals. But in the time of haqiqat, or on the level of haqiqat, which is where we Ismailis are, it is the very opposite, that here, in the period of haqiqat, time is immersed in ibadat, which means that there is no set time for a person to remember God. Yes, we do have the 3 du'as for which there is a set time, and that is a compulsory aspect of our tariqah. But apart from these 3 pairs, we are encouraged by our imams and our peers to do constant remembrance of God, or to do continuous zikr of the remembrance of the light of God. This concept of time divided into sections and then set prayers recited, as opposed to continuous remembrance or zikr, is a concept which is discussed by a very famous da'i called Sayyidina Nasiruddin al-Tusi, and he has written a book called Saleem, which has been translated into English under the title of Paradise of Submission by Sayyid Dr. Jalal Badakhshani, and it has been published by the Institute of Ismaili Studies in January 2005. And it is recommended that the listeners to these talks will take the trouble to refer to this book, which has many, many other important points about Ismailism and Ismaili beliefs. This concept of constant prayer, is also referred to in the Farmans of Maulana Mustansir Billah II alayhi salam, who wrote a book called Pir Pandyate Jawan Mardi and sent it to the Jamaat of the Indian subcontinent, in which he uses this particular description. He says that a mu'min should always remain constantly in prayer, or a mu'min should be da'imuz zikr. And this very concept is also expressed in the ginans of our Pirs and Sayyida Imam Begum. For instance, Pir Sadruddin says in a ginan, Uthte, Bethte, Rah Chalante, Naam Sahib Ji Ka Lijiye, which means that standing, sitting, or walking on the path, always take or remember the name of your Lord. And Sayyidina Imam Begum says in one ginan, Har dam zikr karna, which means take the name of your Lord, take the name of the Noor in every breath. These same ideas have their foundation in the Holy Quran. In the Holy Quran, in chapter 3 or Surah 3, which is called Surah Ali Imran, if we refer to ayat number 191, it reads as follows: In the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of night and day, there are signs for men of understanding, those that remember Allah when standing, sitting, and lying down. So these 3 positions of standing, sitting, and lying down are the 3 positions which human beings have throughout the 24 hours of a day. And in this Quranic ayat, God is encouraging the mu'mins to, whether they are sitting or standing or sleeping, to remember the name of Allah. And this last phrase particularly reminds me of a farman of Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah Salawatullahi alayhi, who had made a farman during his imamat that if a mu'min remembers me last thing at night before he or she falls asleep, then their entire sleep also transforms into ibadat. I would also like to make reference to another Quranic ayat, which is in Surah 29, ayat 45, which says that prayer, meaning any type of prayer, dua, salat, tasbihat, that all these prayers are meant to fend away, to drive away indecency and evil. But the greatest thing is to remember Allah. The greatest thing is to do zikr of Allah. This is very much what we, the Shia Imam Ismailis, believe, that where we have set prayers, such as our 3 daily duas, these daily duas are very important for us. As Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah also mentions in his memoirs on page 176, that prayer is a daily necessity, a direct communication of the spark with the universal flame. So we know the importance of daily prayers, but according to the Quran, the greatest thing is zikrullah, is the remembrance of God. And this is why our ginans and the very recent farmans of Maulana Hazar Imam, all of them place a great deal of emphasis on remembering the Nur of God, remembering the names of God, the names of the Prophet and the names of the Imams at all times, whenever we have even a split second of space or time. In this first talk, I would like to end with one more farman of Nur Maulana Shah Karim ul Hussaini Hazar Imam, which, like the earlier farman of Pune of 1969, is published in the book of Faramin or Farmans called The Precious Gems, the Farmans of Nur Maulana Shah Karim ul Hussaini Hazar Imam. In a farman to the Ismaili Association of that time, because this is a 1967 farman, Maula Bapa told the members, the teachers and the students of the association that we have to know the meaning of our dua, the meaning of our faith. He said, it is important that in learning parts of the Quran, you must clearly understand the meaning. If you recite parts of the Quran, certain words must represent to you a concept. If you study the Quran Sharif, this concept will become well known to you and through you to the Jamaat at large. This takes many years of study. I do not want you to think that this can be learnt easily or without hard work. But it is important that if I ask specific questions, you should be able to answer them unless they are highly intricate matters. I am ending with this farman because in our dua, as we all know, there are Quranic surahs or chapters as well as Quranic ayats. And in this farman, Maulana Hazar Imam says that if we recite any surahs or any verses of the Quran, and inshallah we will be able to more and more recite more of the Quran, that not only should we know the deeper inner meanings of the surahs and the verses, but that these meanings should then represent for us concepts. And these concepts should be known to us and to the Jamaat at large, because this will deepen our understanding of our faith and it will give us greater satisfaction and more spiritual happiness to practice our faith. This particular series of talks is being done in this spirit of extending and deepening our knowledge for the sake of our spiritual progress and for the sake of attaining deeper spiritual satisfaction. Inshallah. Ameen. Ya Ali Madad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In this second talk on the series of the meanings of our dua, it would be important to look at a brief history of our present dua, which is in Arabic. Some members of the Ismaili Jamaat may not be aware that our present dua in Arabic was actually introduced in the time of Hazrat Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah Salawatullahi alayhi, and that first in 1956 it was introduced in the countries of Africa where the Jamaat was living at that time, as well as in Syria, and then in a staggered way it was introduced in India and Pakistan in 1963. And more recently, when the Ismaili Jamaat of Badakhshan, Tajikistan emerged, then it was introduced in 1995 after Maulana Hazar Imam gave his first mulaqat to the Jamaats of Central Asia in Gorno, Badakhshan, Tajikistan. Today, every Jamaat, wherever they live geographically, they all recite the 6 parts of Arabic dua with 6 prostrations. It is very interesting to know that in the Indian subcontinent tradition, we used to recite a very long dua in Gujarati, which had been composed by Pir Sadruddin, and later Pirs had made some modifications, even to the extent that we believe that Pir Shahabuddin Shah, the older brother of Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah, who was the last but one Zahiri or separate Pir, who had made some adjustments to that Gujarati dua. And that dua was very long and it had 17 prostrations. What is an important point here is that this change in the language and the length of the dua is demonstration of the fact that Islam is a dynamic religion, and especially in the Ismaili Tariqa, we believe that the Imam of the time has the prerogative to change the rites and practices as the times around us are changing. We believe, according to the Quranic ayat, which we recite in the second part of our dua, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ati'ullaha wa ati'ur rasul wa ulil amri minkum. The concept of ulil amr for us, which is so firmly grounded in the Holy Quran, shows that we must follow the guidance of the possessors of the command, the possessors of the divine command, who are present in every time. There is a very clear statement of this in a foreword which Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah Salawatullahi alayhi had written in the book Muhammad, A Mercy to All the Nations by Al-Hajj Qasim Ali Jairazbai. And I'm going to quote from this because this is a very important statement. Maula says, and I quote, "We maintain that the Prophet only ordered prayer, fasting, and gentleness in all human relations, kindliness and consideration for all beasts and animals, from the smallest worm to the largest mammal, by the institution of the Ulil Amr, who can be interpreted as Imam and Caliph, and by placing obedience to Ulil Amr immediately after that to God and the Prophet, he ensured that the faith would ever remain living, extending, developing with science, knowledge, art, and industry. Close quotation marks. We see here the statement that because Islam is the religion of nature, Deen of Fitra, and we see that in nature there is continuous dynamism, that nothing is static, everything is moving, natural things are dynamic, society is dynamic. Therefore, in Islam, religion also has to be dynamic. And to keep religion dynamic, to keep religion in line with the changing circumstances, there is the need to have the Ulil Amr, the possessor of the divine command, who is the direct descendant of the Holy Prophet. And his presence and his living guidance is what keeps the Ismaili Tariqah dynamic. Later on, in the same foreword, Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah also says that it is the same Prophet who advises his followers ever to remain Ibnul Waqt, that is, children of the time and period in which they were on earth. And it must be the natural ambition of every Muslim to practice and represent his faith according to the standard of the waqt or space-time. And this phrase, Ibnul Waqt, the children of the time, meaning Ismailis are encouraged to practice their faith in the context in which they live. And this is a very important notion, because if we try to practice the faith as it was practiced 1400 or 2000 or 3000 years ago, then it is more than likely that the faith would become a burden and we would not be able to maintain the practice as it should be. Whereas where there is the guidance of the Ulil Amr or the Imam of the time, then this faith is living, extending, and developing with science, knowledge, art, and industry. And it is possible for the believers of that faith, for the adherents, for the followers of that faith, to practice their faith with comfort and confidence. The second point in this short talk is the actual structure of our dua. Our dua is composed of 6 parts. Each of them begins with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and each of them finishes with Allahumma laka sujudi wa ta'ati. Each part consists of, to begin with, either a Quranic surah, as we have in part 1, the Suratul Fatiha, and in part 6, Suratul Ikhlas, or, as in the case of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th part, we start with a Quranic ayat, and the rest of the parts are composed of supplicatory prayers. Very, very intensive, very profound supplicatory prayers. And it is our aim in this series to take each part and go through them one at a time, and to take, first of all, the correct pronunciation, and then to look at the literal meaning, and finally to look at the esoteric or the batini meaning, and also bring in, wherever possible, the concept which is represented in that Quranic ayat or surah, as well as the meanings of the supplicatory prayers, which are the rest of the parts. Ya Ali Madad. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This third talk is about the meaning of Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, which starts every single one of our 6 parts of the dua. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim is actually from the body or the text of the Quran, and it is to be found in Surah 27, Ayah 30. And later on, as the Quran was being compiled in the time of the Holy Prophet, this phrase was recited as a token of respect, and it is also to be found at the beginning of every one of the chapters or surahs of the Quran, except for chapter 9 or surah 9, which is called Surah At-Tawbah. However, since this phrase is to be found in the text of the Quran, in the body of the Quran, that means that there are 114 chapters in the Quran. And although one of those chapters does not begin with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, nevertheless, this phrase, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, is mentioned 114 times in the Holy Quran. As Muslims, not only do we start the Quran with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, the dua with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, but we start everything with this prayer. For instance, we start our journeys with this prayer. We start our food, our dinner or lunch with this prayer. Any new work which we begin, we start with this prayer. And many members of the Jamaat will have noted that wherever Maulana Hazar Imam has built an Ismaili center, such as the Ismaili Center in London, or the Ismaili Center in Vancouver, or the Ismaili Center in Portugal, in Lisbon, then this phrase, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, is given great prominence at the beginning of the building, so to speak. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim is a phrase which we use many, many times in the day. If we recite our 3 duas punctually and regularly, that itself is 18 times a day. And then if we also use it for our meals and our journeys and any new work which we begin, then we are reciting this phrase many, many times during the day. And therefore it is important for us to know the beauty and the meaning of this phrase. There is a tradition from Maulana Ali alayhi salam, which is mentioned in a book called Kokab-e-Durri on page 297, that Maulana Ali Amirul Mu'minin one day said, "If I wish, I can load 70 camels with the explanation of the Ba of Bismillah," which means that Hazrat Ali's knowledge, because he in his time was وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَسْوَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ, that he was the possessor of all the knowledge, then the Imam had so much knowledge about just the first letter of Bismillah, that is Ba, the B in English, then if he were to explain the letter B of Bismillah, he would have filled enough books to make up the load of 70 camels. That gives us an indication of how much wealth of knowledge there is in this phrase, if its first letter alone would fill 70 camel loads. We are not going to be able to do that much in our talk, but we will attempt to try and understand the beauty of this phrase, this kalima, as we say, this statement which is at the beginning of our prayers and all the good things that we start in our daily lives. Bismillah consists of 2 phrases, Bismillah and Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. But when it is recited together, we recite it as Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The first phrase, Bismillah, consists of 7 Arabic alphabetical letters, and the second phrase, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, consists of 12 letters. And as we know, the number 7 has great significance in the Ismaili Tariqah because there are many, many references to the number 7 in the Holy Quran. For instance, God speaks of the creation as having taken place in 7 days because he says that he created creation in 6 days and then on the 7th he manifested himself on his throne. We as Ismailis have ta'wil, the esoteric meaning of this particular verse of creation, because in Islam we believe that physical creation is constant. Maulana Sultan Muhammad Shah alayhi salam says in his chapter 8 of the memoirs that the creation according to Islam is not a unique act in a given time, but a perpetual and constant event. And we have heard farmans, particularly of the Silver Jubilee of Maulana Hazar Imam, in which he has said that Allah creates today, Allah creates tomorrow, and Allah will create the day after. In other words, for us, the physical creation is a continuous, a constant, a perpetual event. So what does the Quran mean when it says that God created creation in 6 days? According to Ismaili ta'wil or batini meaning, esoteric meaning of this verse, we understand here that God is talking about the creation of the world of religion. So the 6 days are the 6 great prophets or natiks. They have a revealed book and they bring a shariat or a law of religion. And God completes the shariat of the religion in 6 days from Hazrat Adam through Hazrat Nuh to Hazrat Abraham to Hazrat Musa to Hazrat Isa to Hazrat Nabi Muhammad Mustafa. And the 7th day when God manifests on his throne is the day of the Imam Mubin, the living, present, manifest Imam. The Quran also refers to 7 heavens and 7 earths. There is also mention that the human beings go through 7 stages of creation in the mother's womb, and then finally the 7th stage is the completion of the human creation. So the number 7, for us, for instance, in Shia Islam, we believe in the 7 pillars of Islam. So the number 7 is not a coincidence. It is not an accident. It is according to divine plan. And therefore, the very fact that the phrase Bismillah has 7 letters in it should make us really reflect on this, what is known as a perfect mathematical number as well. And then additionally, the Suratul Fatiha, which we are going to discuss later, also has 7 verses in it. To carry on about Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, the 7 can also represent the minor cycles of 7 Imams. So if we take the time of Hazrat Nabi Muhammad Mustafa, or the cycle or the period of the final prophet of God, then there have been 7 cycles of 7 Imams each, and today we are in the time of the 49th Imam, Nur Maulana Shah Kareem ul Hussaini Hazar Imam. In many history books, even encyclopedias of Islam, there is a misrepresentation about the significance which we give to the number 7. For instance, you will find that sometimes historians and other scholars, they refer to Ismailis as seveners, and they juxtapose this to the other group in Shia Islam who are known as the Ithna Ashariya or the Twelvers. But this is a misrepresentation about us because we don't simply believe that there have been 7 Imams. We believe that there are, to date, 7 cycles of 7 Imams. And so it is important for us to, when we read books written by other people, to be discerning and to understand what are the principles of our beliefs. So the number 7 can represent the minor cycle of 7 Imams each. And as I said, we are in the 7 by 7, the 49th. And as the line of Imamat continues, there will be another cycle and another cycle and another cycle, because we Ismailis believe firmly that what the Quran says is hakikat, or the truth. And in the Quran, in Surah 9, God says in the verse 32 that many people, many disbelievers will try to extinguish the light of God, but the light of God cannot be extinguished. Allah will not allow people to blow out His light. In fact, Allah is going to perfect His light. And we also know that in Surah Nur, which is a great favorite of Ismailis, in Surah Nur is Surah 24, and in Ayah 35, there is the phrase Nurun ala Nur, light upon light. Therefore, our belief is that the line of Imamat continues unbroken. The phrase Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim consists of 12 letters, and in classical Ismaili teachings, these 12 are the 12 hujjats or peers who are the heads of the mission to spread hakikati knowledge, esoteric knowledge, and who spread love and devotion for the Imam of the time. So Bismillahirrahmanirrahim has a numerical symbolism, and now we go and try and understand its meaning as well. In its meaning, exoterically, people say that it means in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. But that is a very zahiri, very exoteric interpretation, because the little word bi, preposition in Arabic, has more than one meaning. And the meaning which we Ismailis take as its inner or batini or hakikati or ta'wili meaning is that it means through the name of Allah, which is merciful and compassionate. How do we substantiate this esoteric meaning? What is our thinking? How do we believe that this means through the name of Allah? Our very, very great Ismaili scholar of the Fatimid times, his name was Sayyidina al-Mu'ayyad Shirazi, who was the head of the Ismaili Da'wah in the time of Maulana Mustansir Billah I. He has written 800 majalis or lectures Only very few of those have been translated into English. And he says in his writings that according to Ismailis, the names of God are living, speaking, with intellect, and they are honored names. I will mention the Arabic phrase because it's a very important point for us to remember. Sayyidina al-Mu'ayyad Fiddin Shirazi writes in Arabic, Asma'un hayyatun natikatun aqilatun sharifa. And each of those words means the names of God are living, hayyatun, speaking, natikatun, with intellect, aqilatun, and sharifa, or honored, or revered, or esteemed, highly respected. Why does Sayyidina al-Mu'ayyad say this? Because as we know from Islamic studies and general knowledge, that Allah has 99 names. Let's take some of these names, like Ar-Rahim, Ar-Rahman, Rabb, Adil, Qahhar, Wahhab, Ahad. All these names are composed of letters. And anybody can write these letters on a blackboard, on a whiteboard, on a piece of paper, on a computer screen, and all you have to do, if you don't write them properly or you don't need them any longer, is you can simply erase them or delete them or rub them out. Our Ismaili scholars and peers and hujjats have taught that this is not right, that Allah should only have names which are made up of alphabetical letters which anybody can erase or delete at any time. Allah should also have living names. And the living names of Allah are the prophets and imams. And we know through history that although some people, some disbelievers have tried to erase them, to blow them out, to martyr them, and yes, they have succeeded, as they did in the case of Hazrat Isa, Jesus, or in the case of Imam Hussein. But the line of divine guidance has never been broken, because the next prophet came, or the next Imam was chosen by God to guide the people according to divine will. So for us, God has two types of names: verbal names as well as living names. In fact, we have another hujjat or peer who tells us that the Imam of the time is the supreme name of God. This is Pir Nasir Kisra. If you have the book, The Shimmering Light, an anthology of Ismaili poetry, which was compiled by Dr. Fakir Muhammad Hunzai and published by the Institute, and it has been in several prints now. You can go to page 61, and in a poem entitled Journey to the Light, in the very final verse, Pir Nasir Kisra says, "The supreme name is the Imam of the time. Through him, Venus-like, I ascended to the heavens." Why did Pir Nasir Kisra say this? It was not simply out of gratitude that, having reached the light of the Imam, he was able to progress spiritually and Venus-like ascend to the heavens. It is because this is part of the belief of the Ismaili tariqah. And we have, for instance, a very important saying of our Imam, Maulana Jafar Sadiq. Maulana Jafar Sadiq refers to chapter 7 or surah 7 of the Quran, verse or ayat number 180, which reads, Allah's are the most beautiful names, so call him by them. And referring to this ayat, Maulana Jafar Sadiq says, we are the beautiful names of Allah and his sublime attributes. Through us, he is recognized, and through us, he is worshipped. And this saying, this tradition of Maulana Jafar Sadiq can be found. The reference for that is a book called Tafsir Isafi. We are very lucky that many of the writings and sayings of our Imams are preserved in the books of other sister Muslim communities as well. And this Tafsir Isafi is one such book, and in it is recorded this saying of Maulana Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, where he says, we are the beautiful names of Allah. So for us then, when we say Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, what we are actually saying esoterically is that we begin our prayer, we begin whatever we begin through the name, the living name of Allah. That is the present Imam, the Imam of the time. And it is the Imam of the time who is the attribute of Allah. The Imam of the time is merciful and compassionate. The Imam of the time is just. The Imam of the time is the Rabb, the sustainer. The Imam of the time is Wahhab. He is the bestower. And so on and so on. All these descriptions of Allah apply to the Imam, the living Imam. Because in Ismaili thinking, Allah transcends all descriptions. And the Imam of the time represents all the attributes of Allah on earth. One other interesting point about Bismillahirrahmanirrahim is the letter B, which is at the beginning of Bismillah. There is a wonderful tradition that the whole of the Quran, all 114 chapters, are condensed and encompassed in the Suratul Fatiha. And the whole of the Suratul Fatiha, which is 7 verses, is condensed in Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. And then the whole of the phrase Bismillahirrahmanirrahim is actually condensed in the first letter, and the first letter has a dot. In Arabic, there is a nukta or a dot under the letter ba. There are several traditions about this, and it may be a bit difficult to convey this in speech, but for instance, if you take the letter B in Arabic or in Urdu or Farsi as well, because the script is the same, then the letter B is like a semicircle, an elongated semicircle. But when the Arabic language was a pictorial language, then the picture which represented the letter B was a house, because in Arabic the house means bait. And therefore, just as in English we say A for apple, then when people wanted to write the letter B, they would draw a house, like a rectangle. And in the front of this, there would be a house, and in front of this house, there would be a door, and there would be a little man or a figure standing in this doorway. As the Arabic alphabet developed, this rectangle became this elongated semicircle, and the door and the person standing in it dropped down to become a dot under the B. Now, let's look at the traditions which relate to this story that the letter was first a rectangular house, Bait, and later on became the shape that is used now, with the dot underneath it. The three quotations are, two of them are the hadith or prophetic traditions, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam said, I am the city of knowledge and Ali is the door. Whoever wants knowledge should enter through the door. And the other saying of the Holy Prophet was, I am the house of wisdom and Ali is the door. So this door, which is now represented by a dot, is a reference to Hazrat Ali and the knowledge of Hazrat Ali. And therefore, there is a famous saying of Hazrat Ali in which he says, I am the dot under the ba of Bismillah. In other words, if everything is condensed into this dot, and this dot represents Hazrat Ali or the Imam of the time, then once again that is an explanation of وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَسْوَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ, that all knowledge is encompassed in the manifest Imam. So when we recite Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, if we do so with this understanding, with this knowledge of the meaning of Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, both the symbolic meaning as well as the esoteric meaning and the concept which is represented here, that is, all knowledge is in the Imam of the time, who is the supreme, living, speaking, with intellect and honored name of God on earth. It gives us a lot more satisfaction and spiritual happiness to understand that this is what we are reciting at least 18 times a day with our 3 dua recitation, and inshallah more than 18 times, because as Muslims we do use Bismillahirrahmanirrahim more often than that. Ya Ali Madad.